Yo, what is up, gang? Man, fuck this shit. Yo, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Laghima here, and today's tutorial we're going to cover some new stuff. We're going to be covering jazz theory, so we're covering the 2-5-1 chord progression. We're going to be covering passing 2-5-1 chords, and also passing sustained 2-5-1 chords. So just some super interesting stuff. And also with that, I'm going to be covering just kind of how to use those and kind of chord progressions to really spice them up, and make your chord progressions that's super jazzy and really get some cool stuff. Also, if you haven't seen the earlier videos I made, I would definitely check those out. I'm going to link them above so you guys can see them. And those tutorials just cover like the basic stuff, because I'm not really going to cover that stuff in this tutorial. That's going to be more advanced. So anyways, guys, as always, let's get into it.
Voices in my head, they kill me. You don't know, swear you don't feel me.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is actually going to be a chord progression called the 2-5-1. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically just an essential part of jazz. And it's just a good thing in general to learn. But the basic idea is that you play the 2, 5, and 1 chord of any given scale. And it's like, you can think of it as like a chord methodology where they always try to include it as much as possible. And there's much more applications than that. But initially, this is what I'm going to explain. So anyways, let's talk about that. So what I mean by the 2, the 5, and the 1 chord of any scale. So if you take the C minor scale, for instance, C major. So any of these scale elements can really be represented as chords. So for instance, the first chord would be the C major, then D minor, then E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C major. Or another way to state this would be, this is the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, so forth and so on. I have a video on that. I'm gonna kind of put it up above so the way you guys can see it. And it pretty much just goes through all the preliminary stuff. So the basic idea with the 2-5-1 is that you play a 2-5-1. So you'd play, in this case, the C major scale, a D minor chord followed by a G major chord going into the C major chord, and you would have a 2-5-1 chord progression. So in its most basic rendition, it sounds like as follows. So we're just gonna make it real quick. So C, E, G, D, or whatever the fuck that is. And also another thing in jazz is that they tend to use chord extensions. So what I mean is that they don't use like basic normal triads. And then we're gonna make a G chord. G, G, B, and that. And then back to the C major chord. So let's go ahead and hear that real quick. So as you can hear, that sounds good. There's nothing really particularly wrong with it. But the main thing is that even though it sounds good, it sounds really jumpy. It's not very smooth like in jazz. So how they kind of, what's what I'm looking for, get around this is by doing something called voice leading. So voice leading is basically just adding inversions or whatever to chords to make there be as little as movement as possible. That's why jazz sounds so smooth. It's because it actually is smooth. There's not a lot of melodic jumps. So how are we gonna do that? So the easiest way would actually just be to take these 2 notes from the G major 7th chord and just bump them down. And then we'll have these chords here, which is the exact same chords. It's still 1, 2, 5, and then 1 again, but now there's less movement. So let's give that a listen. You'll see there's definitely like a huge difference between them. So as you can hear, it sounds a lot more smooth. There's a lot less jumps, and that makes a huge difference, especially when you're talking about chords. The main thing when it comes to chords, especially in jazz in particular, is first off adding extensions, which in jazz is essential. Another thing is also just being very particular about your voicing. The voicing means everything. The way you actually play the chord is more important really than the chords you're playing, because if you voice it correctly or voice it where there's very little movement, you'll get a chord progression that's very smooth, that sounds very jazzy, which is usually a huge part of jazz, is they have smooth progressions. So what I'm gonna do up next is bring up just more chord progressions from a 2-5-1. So it's really just gonna be a 2-5-1, but just voiced differently. So as you can see here, I have a 2-5-1. So basic 2-5-1 that I'm gonna play, and then I'm gonna show you a more advanced voicing. So on the left, on the left is just the basic one, and on the right I have a 2-5-1 voiced where I've dropped the one and done slight alterations to just the voicing of the chord. It's still the same chord, but it's just the voicing is slightly different. So let's get them listed. So I'm gonna play the first side first, and that way you guys can hear the basic one. So it sounds completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you compare it with this voicing, you see there's a major difference. So what makes them both very distinct is, first, even though they have pretty identical voicing, as you can see here, the only actual difference between them is that, let's see here, I think actually everything is pretty much the same. The main thing is that all these bass notes have been dropped an octave, and I've made these into ninth chords. So what I mean by ninth chords is that I've basically, for instance, let's take the C major 7 here, is that I've added a ninth. So we know that the 1 is really just the 8. So if we go 1 above the 8, which in this case would be the D, I'd have a 9. So this would be C major 9. So what that does is that and in the case of like the way I voice the second half, which should be this half, it allows me to voice it a lot differently. Since I've added this ninth, a higher degree, I can actually drop the 1. So I can drop the 1 regardless, and we can kind of see how that would sound if I were to just drop the 1 normally. And see. So as you can see, still sounds fine. But adding that higher order degree to the chord, which is the ninth chord, gives the chord progression a much more like lushness. It really feels, or what we like to say, colors the chord out a lot. Well, that's another part of jazz. It's not so much just playing, 2-5-1 willy-nilly, but actually playing it colorfully, adding higher order degrees and voicing it very smoothly, so that way it sounds smooth and lush. That's really the biggest part of jazz. That's why the 2-5-1 is very essential, because the sound of jazz is really just the sound of the 2-5-1, which is that, soft resolution to very strong resolution from the 5, which is why in jazz you see it's very prominent. So I just want to kind of bring that across, is that in jazz, the 2-5-1 is essential. It's really simple. It's not hard to understand, but just using it practically is what's the major part. So you can use this for any sort of music genre as well, jazz, hip hop, future bass, trap, whatever. The idea is just voice the chord very smoothly. Voice the chord smoothly, as well as use the chord in a way that's interesting that you wouldn't normally use, such as just using like higher order degrees, like 9th, 7th, 13th, 11th, so forth and so on. So anyways, that's going to conclude this part. So before we're going to get into it, if you haven't already, I have another tutorial that is going to cover passing chords, because I'm going to cover them like super briefly. It's not really the point of this tutorial is to cover passing chords. It's more so cover 2-5-1 passing chords. I may inadvertently cover them anyways, but just in case, I'm going to link it above. Check out the tutorial. It will cover it much more in depth. Anyways, so very briefly, what are passing chords? Passing chords are basically a secondary dominant. So if you know traditionally already that in any given scale you have a dominant, which we say is the 5. Major or minor does not matter. So in this case, I'm in the C major scale, and if I play the dominant of the dominant, which means I play the dominant of the C major scale and the dominant, which is G major, and the dominant of that dominant, which means I need to go to the G major scale and play the dominant there, which I believe is F sharp major. So in this case, I have exactly that case. So what I have is a C major chord followed by a D major chord followed by a G major 7th chord followed by a C major 7th chord. So if I mute them, or if I play this, you'll obviously see that it sounds fine. So I'm resolving from the 5 of the G major scale to G major, and then I'm resolving from the G major to C major. So what I'm really doing is playing a dominant, then a dominant, then the tonic. So the C acts as the tonic, then the D acts as the dominant of this G major chord. Then when I play the G major chord, it's acting as the dominant of the C major scale. So what I'm really doing is, like I said, playing the dominant of the dominant. You don't have to do it necessarily always on the dominant chord, but I'm just showing the most basic and rudimentary version of a passing chord. So anyways, what I'm going to show you next is using a 2-5-1 as a passing chord. And why this is unique and very untalked about is because it's much more complicated. It's really expanding on the idea that we initially talked about. Because by knowing how a passing chord works and knowing that you can apply it to any chord, you can use it in any sort of way. So what I'm going to show you next is a chord progression I made up. It's pre-made up. I literally spent 2 seconds making it. And what it is it's I'm going to I believe the A minor scale, and I'm doing a passing chord. So here's the chord progression. So first I start by playing the 1, then I play a 2. Now I'm going to play the 5. The 5 of the C major scale is actually this G major 7th. But instead of just going into it normally, I'm going to pass into it. So I know, as we mentioned last time, that the 5 of the G major chord is actually, in the G major scale, is actually this D major chord. But what I'm doing is I'm passing 2-5. So I also play the 2 of the G major scale, which is this chord here. I think this is an E major chord, or E major, E minor. I can't remember which one. But anyways, the main idea here. So anyways, let's play it out and hear how it sounds. So as you can hear, this chord progression sounds super lush. I haven't even really done that much editing. Like for instance, I haven't like dropped the 1s and added 9s or anything. I just kept it super basic. The main real principle here, like I said, is these 3 chords. These 3 chords really add a lot to this chord progression. If I were to take them away, you would see this chord progression doesn't sound nearly as good. And the reason why is because this huge passing I'm doing, this passing of the 2 and the 5, really adds the most to the chord progression. So I really want to make that super clear. Another thing that you can do, like I said, to kind of make this chord progression better is add inversions, add higher extensions, for instance, add 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, to really just make the chord progression super come alive. And that's one of the main things about passing chords is you can really pass any sort of structure that you come up with. And that's the main important thing. So in this case, I just chose to pass a 2-5-1. I would usually stick with things that you already know that work. So for instance, a 2-5-1, do you know that works? You can technically pass something like, I haven't tried it, but in theory, I'm guessing you can pass something like a 6-2 or something like that. But the main idea anyways is pass the 2-5-1. This is how it works. Super simple. It's really just going to the target scale. In this case, the target scale is G major. Selecting the 2 chords, selecting the 5 chord, slap them in your chord progression, voicing them correctly, making sure this voicing is really smooth, and at that point you're gonna have a cool sounding chord progression. So next we're going to talk about is combining a previous thing I talked about in the last tutorial, which was sustained chords, using them with the 2-5-1 and passing chords. So what we're doing is passing 2-5-1 sus chords. It's basically what I'm explaining. So I'm going to point the 2-5-1 chords. So I'm going to point out just real quickly the sus chords so you can see them. I'm going to explain how they're sus and so forth and so on. So anyways, first off, how sus chords work kind of very quickly is that you choose the target chord you're going to, and instead of playing the 3rd, you play the 4th or the 2nd, which we call a sus4 or sus2. So I believe in all the ones in this one, I've used a sus4, I believe. So for instance, in this one, in this case, this is the 1st sustained chord, this is the 2nd sustained chord. So this is a D major sus4, this is a minor sus2, I believe. And as you can see, The target chords are these. So for instance, my A minor 7 and my D major 7th. So what I'm doing is that I'm playing these sus chords before them, and also I have sus chords over here. I believe this one is a sus chord, and this is a sus chord as well. So the idea I'm presenting is that instead of just playing the 2-5-1, the passing 2-5-1 normally, I'm adding a sustained chord before I play the normal 2-5-1 that I'm passing, and that way I get a super crazy chord progression that just sounds mad, colorful, and wild. So let's just give it a listen and see how it sounds. So as you can hear, that sounds super, super colorful. There's a lot going on melodically as far as the kind of the chords are working. So the main idea here is, once again, combining techniques. So I have the 2-5-1, and I'm taking all of the ideas and I'm combining them together to get a collaboratively good or just unique chord progression that is made from using a variety of techniques. And that's the main thing about chord making. It's not so much coming up with ridiculous chords, it's more so using your knowledge to come up with interesting chords effectively. Like for instance, this chord progression took me no time at all to make, and the main reason why, because I understand how sus chords work, I understand how passing chords work, and then 2-5-1 chord progression, and combining all those ideas together, I was able to get something that was very interesting and also very unique really quickly. So my word of advice would just be combine techniques, use the 2-5-1, you get to order something jazzy, add extensions, inversions, and everything I've talked about, all the other previous tutorials, to really get just like a good overarching good chord progression. You come up with stuff quickly and effectively. And yeah, guys, that's gonna be it for this section. So that pretty much ends it for the video today, guys. If you like the tutorial, gonna make sure to subscribe and hit that smash button. Actually, don't forget to actually smash that bitch. Let me know. Actually, comment down below and also like as well. Let me know if you guys like the tutorial or what other content you guys want. As always, I'm gonna be posting more beat videos here pretty soon. I know I've been doing a lot of music theory stuff, but they're coming on the way. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Laghima Beats. I post every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Super active, always slide in the DMs. I always respond. Love talking to you guys. Eventually, when we hit probably about 1K, I'll start a Discord and stuff, and we can get that kind of all set up so that we can kind of like a normal chat and whatnot, just be like sliding through DMs. But anyways, if you like the video, subscribe, hit me up. Talk to you guys soon. Laghima out.